Hi, so this video is all about turning a flat roof, an asphalt flat roof, into a pitched roof. Later on you see the stages of removing the asphalt roof, building the new roof structure, felting and battening, and then tiling with concrete tiles, and then cutting into the wall and sealing the edge with lead, and then finishing off with your PVC soffits, fascias and gutters. First, let's get on with removing the asphalt. As you can see, the roof is in pretty poor condition. The asphalt seems to have become porous, or it's cracked or something, and the water has got into the roof and rotted it severely. What I found is the quickest way to remove the asphalt, which is a pretty heavy covering of, in this case, about 10 to 15 mil. As you can see here, I've cut all the way around the edge of the roof where I want to remove it. And what did I use to cut it? I found it's quickest just to use a circular saw. This is with a coarse wood cutting blade on it, and I set the height of the cut to be equivalent to the height of the asphalt, which is about 10 to 15 mil, plus the height of the ply board underneath, which is about 18 mil. Then it cuts through most of the ply without interfering in the joists or cutting through the joists too much. Because it's a flat roof, what you have is a joist and some tapered spacing piece of wood on the top to give it some sort of slope. So once I've cut it, I then basically got some, to start it off in a corner, got some screwdrivers down the slot, levered it up. Once you start, then the best way of getting a good amount of leverage is to get a spade, jam it under like that, and apply a bit of leverage, pull it up like so till it detaches from the ply. Then get yourself a hammer and a sharp end, just give it a whack, and what will happen is the asphalt will just crack off like so. And then you can just pick it up and dispose of it. Ply in this case will also need removing. Obviously it's rotten, so what I'm going to do is grind through the nails that's attaching on it with an angle grinder, and then pry up the ply board. That's how to remove the asphalt. I'm not a great fan of asphalt. The roof may have lasted about 25 years, but it seems to have become porous, or it's got micro cracks in it or something, and it's also a very heavy covering as well. So what's probably more cost effective for me, at least on this roof, is I'm going to replace it by a pitched roof. This is just a temporary cover. See, I've made a little frame out of fence rails, put some tarpaulin over it. Also, you don't want water coming in the room below. I'm trying not to disturb the room below at all. That's how to quickly remove asphalt. So next on to building the roof structure. I'm not going to laboriously detail every single stage. Rather, this is to give you a flavour of how the project is done. And as you can see here on time lapse, you can see the roof structure going up and roughly how it's built. I'll detail some of the timber sizes in a minute. The roof rafters, which are the diagonal pieces going up to the top, they would normally rest on a wall plate, which is a piece of wood sits on top of the wall. That would normally be on the inside wall, with sufficient overhang for the depth of soffit or overhang over the roof that you want. But on this particular wall, because of its structure, then they're actually resting on the outside wall. So as you can see, here's the frame structure. Things are a bit different on this roof. You'll notice that we don't see the joists running across. Normally you'd have the joists joined to the rafters. So these are the rafters, the joists are the horizontal pieces. They would be going across, supporting the ceiling, supporting any floor inside that area. But because it's an existing flat roof, of course the joists are well down here under the insulation and difficult to tie the joists to the rafters. So the architect had some quite high up collars, those horizontal pieces at the top. The idea is basically to stop these timbers from spreading due to the weight of the tiles on the roof, unless you've got something like we've got here, or you've got joists connecting to the rafters of the roof, then the inclination will be for the roof to come down and these to come out from the side. If you just rely on the wall to stop that happening, you can get cracks in the wall. So we've actually put some additional ties in as well, these two going across and a couple joining down to the joists, the existing joists, onto the rafters, just to increase the support that the roof has to stop it spreading. So it should be fine now. These hips are 8 by 2, wall plate 4 by 2. I don't pretend to be a roofing expert, by the way. I'm just sharing my experience of how this roof was built by a carpenter friend of mine. Did a good job, I think. It was a little bit tricky because the wall on that side was a stud wall, and so we had to build in some additional joists, beam going across, a couple of 9 by 2s to support a double wall plate, as you can see there, and it had to be higher because it's a little bit in from the outside wall, which is right down there. So you can see how it's constructed. We've got batten over here, looks like a 2 by 1 for supporting the soffit underneath. We have this piece of roughly 6 by 1 inch to support the outside fascia. You will note that I've actually ordered an insufficiently deep fascia board, so this is a mistake that's obviously been made, and it should be at least about that sort of depth of fascia board. I'm actually going to put a joiner on this and just put a filling piece on it. It's a little bit quicker. Yeah, I'm not going to see it because it's going to be behind the guttering, which will sit about here somewhere. And there's a bit of finishing off to do, some corner pieces that need fitting, and a bit of plastic that needs to go around the end with the corner, of course. Do that later. These soffit boards, as you can see here, are UPVC, which are hollow section pieces that just slot together. This piece is a piece of UPVC batten that you can see here is nailed onto this wooden batten that's screwed onto the wall. So I've gone for a soffit depth of about 250 millimeters and a fascia height of roughly 150 and a bit, 160 or so, which I quite like the look of that sort of dimension. And then the next job is to put this breathable felt over the top. I'm going to just staple it down, staple gum, and then put the battens on top, which are 2 by 1 pieces of batten wood, which go horizontally across, which are what hold the tiles. So we'll come back to it when I've done that. As soon as the felt is added, it'll be waterproof, because it's a breathable felt. You don't need any vents in the soffits to ventilate the roof. So you can now see we've started putting the breathable felt on and battening at the same time. That aids in climbing up the roof to do the top bits. There's nearly 45, about 42 degree slope, so quite difficult to climb on without the battens. Probably need a ladder, and there's a couple of things you need to work out. How the tiles are going to sit, so you don't want that end tile drooping down because it's not sitting on top of another tile, so you need to make sure that it's resting on a piece of wood or batten, fascia board, and the other thing you need to work out is how many tiles are going to make it to the top. I think it's 11 tiles from here to the top, so it works out quite nicely. Otherwise you could either decrease the pitch slightly to give it a nice even number, or probably doesn't matter too much, you could just cut the tiles when you get to the top. But it's useful having a whole number, in that then you've still got the ledge that sits on the edge of the tile, or holding it against the batten, and of course you can put a nail through to hold it on the batten as well. So this is where you want to lay the felt, horizontally. Then you can get a good overlap. I think this line is the recommended overlap of the felt, and battens of course help you then to do the next stretch. So Also make sure you get a good overlap around the corners. So run this sheet all the way over and down to the bottom, and then any water that gets in the edge of this sheet will just go down the first sheet. I want to get into the roof, so do it in these horizontal layers and continue like that until you cover the whole roof. Then it'll be waterproof. So the battens are roughly about 2 inches by 1 inches, and use galvanized nails to hammer them in on each rafter. The other thing I tried to avoid here is having any pooling of water if it does have to run down this felt. So I always try to maintain a little bit of a sloping angle of the felt rather than having it flatten out, which meant a slight angle on the batten. So hopefully you then won't get any water gathering behind the batten. So here you can see I finished the felting and the battening, which means the roof is now watertight. So how long has it taken so far? So 2 carpenters were here on the first day to build the roof structure, and they finished that, just one of the guys on the second day. At the same time I was doing the inside insulation, and then when they'd finished, did the felting and most of the battening. Because rain was due that night, it was quite a long day. I had to make sure I got all the felt done. So that took me till about 9:10 in the evening to get it watertight. And then you've got a little bit more time in which to sort out some of the details, like getting your tiles, trial fitting them, fitting bird stop, fixing that fascia thing on the front. So the important thing when fitting these battens is to make sure they're all parallel. So as you're fitting them, measure the distance between them, try and keep it consistent and the same all the way down. Otherwise your tiles won't be fitting correctly. So if you imagine these 2 tiles are your roof, if these 2 battens are diverging slightly, that'll put an angle on the tile with respect to the other one. You'll get a slight gap between them, which isn't great for waterproofing. Whereas if they're perfectly parallel, then they'll butt exactly and make a good seal. So you need to measure that as you go up. I'm doing some trial fitting of some of these tiles just to make sure this bottom tile sits at the right height on this bottom batten with the bird stop piece of plastic in place. So if you push on this second tile, you should find that that tile feels nice and steady. If it's sitting a little bit too low, it'll like to come up as you're pushing on that. And also check on the side whether the angle looks correct if you're happy with that. Some roofs have a tiny little decrease in angle coming out. This one I want to keep perfectly straight, so it's worth taking a bit of time over that. I like to fit this bird stopper piece of plastic. The idea of that, as the name implies, is to stop birds getting up in your roof, because if you didn't have it, and a lot of roofers don't bother fitting it, is you've got a nice, on these tiles you've got a nice little gap here, hollow. Birds can get up there, they'll nest on the top, sit on your felt, put loads of crap in there, may even eventually hole it, which could ruin your waterproofing. So for only a pound a metre or so or less, this bird stopper really just discourages birds from getting up there, and you can see how it sits. You want it tile sitting so that the plastic bends out that way, and if we have a look in here how that sits, and that stops the birds getting in, but also maintains the ventilation in the roof. So you can see I'm also sorting out a bit of fascia here. I'm obviously going to cut that off to match the overhanging tile later. Joint piece on the fascia eventually got sorted. I would recommend trying to order the right size plastic in the first place, of course. Probably somebody will have a go at me on this video and say that's a bodge, but that's my choice since it's my house. Be careful when you're fitting these bird stopper pieces of plastic that your screws don't puncture, of course, the felt underneath. So don't screw it in too far, and make sure it's the right length. Obviously for these tiles we want to start on the right hand side and put them down going from right to left, because each tile of course sits on top of the tile to its right. You will need an angle grinder disc cutter with a diamond blade to cut these tiles to match the roof line. These tiles I managed to pick up second-hand, actually got them from somebody on eBay, considerably cheaper than the local reclamation yard, but that's also an option. It did take a while to pick them up, transport them and clean them up with a jet washer, so it's up to you whether you buy new or not. Probably if I was doing it the next time, I would seriously or more seriously consider buying new tiles, because they're actually cheaper than the reclaimed tiles. In this case, these tiles by Marley are no longer made. I think they're called double bold or something. They do match the rest of the house, which is quite nice. The colour's a bit different now they've all been cleaned up, but that'll settle in over the years. Because it's going to take me a while to get these tiles up, and as you can see, it's now raining. To maintain fairly reasonable waterproofing of the roof, I've actually sealed up the felt against the wall with some polymer sealant. I'm sure no other roofer would probably bother doing it. At least it means if you get a downpour that the water's not going to hit the wall and pour in the roof past the felt. Alternatively, you could cut in your lead flashing as one of the next jobs to do. We shall divert rain onto the felt as well. I'm going to do that after I've got the tiles up there, so that I can more accurately see the height at which to cut in the lead. So the building regs officer has passed or allowed me just to put a cut in the wall of 1 inch or 2 in which to insert the lead flashing, code 4 lead flashing, code 4 describing the thickness of the lead. Ordinarily, if you're building a new house, or if they're being very strict, they would insist on a lead tray. So basically that is the lead going through the wall with a slight lip on the inside, so that any water penetrating the wall hits the tray and is diverted to the outside. Fortunately, he's allowed me just to cut into the wall, put the lead in, obviously seal it with a sealant suitable for lead, like some stuff called Lead Mate. I'll try and put some links in the video description for things like that. So that is obviously a lot easier, and I don't really want to disturb the structure of the original wall, which he has also agreed is the best thing to do. And to secure the tiles in position, you want the galvanised nails hammered through the mounting hole of the right length, so that it can go into the batten without going too far and penetrating the felt, of course. You might find that the concrete is a little bit blocked, just need to give it a slight tap to get it through the hole. So here's a bit of progress with me starting to tile the roof. As you can see, a couple of rows. I'm trying to keep it even all the way around so that it puts the same pressure on the roof. And obviously as you get to the edge, you need to make some diagonal cuts in the tiles, for which a 9-inch disc cutter is pretty essential with a diamond cutting blade. As you get to the edge, there will be odd little sections of tile, like these bits here, that it's impossible to like mount onto the battens. So what I personally use, I'm not sure what building professionals use, is I'll use some pink grip adhesive. This stuff's by Everbuild, just to put a bead down where the tiles join, just to hold it temporarily until we get around to putting some mortar for mounting the ridge tile, which will also hold little sections of tile in place. The other thing worth mentioning is that I didn't nail every single tile in, because if your nail position is on the batten where it's not near a roof joist, you can get quite a lot of bounce on the batten, which makes it difficult to get the nail in. So what I've done is just put nails in where it's close to a batten, get a much firmer connection between the nail and the batten, and it doesn't bounce and it goes in better. By the looks of things, a lot of people don't actually bother using nails anyhow, because all of these tiles, which were second hand from another roof, none of the holes had been knocked through, which implies that none of it had any nails in it, interestingly. And also it also had a terrible overlap. You can see here the effect of weathering. That's the original tile, that's the weathering, which means the overlap was there. So virtually no overlap over the nail position, which is not good. And in contrast, the sort of overlap I've got is a lot more, as you can see here. So what's that, about 10 centimeters or so at least. So as you're progressing up the roof, it's probably a bit easier to lay them out diagonally as you get towards the top, because you'll need a ladder to be safe getting higher up. You can just about clamber on them depending on the tile, but these newer ones are a little bit slippery. Nailing where you can. Be careful that the ladder doesn't slide away at the bottom. You see there, I've stopped it because I've got a wall conveniently positioned that far away, and I've jammed it with some tiles to stop it sliding away. But at this sort of angle of ladder, it's very likely that the ladder will slide away, which not in this with this ladder, but with an old wooden one did actually happen earlier. Bruised a couple of my ankles, so learn by my mistakes. So that is all of the roof tiles in position, and as you can see I've cut along the edge as well, and just getting ready to fit the hip tiles, which we need to start off with this hip iron, which is basically just a piece of galvanized metal screwed onto the hip. And the next thing is to mix up some mortar to basically concrete in the hip tiles and fill this gap, fill where it joins to the tiles at the side as well. And as you can see here, I started to fill the big holes with broken bits of tile. And now you can either do this when you mix up the concrete and mix it with the mortar, or like I've done here, is to pre-fill the holes and then put the mortar on top. I think this is the normal way people do it from what I've seen from other roofs I've dismantled. Previously I did mix it up with the mortar, but it in the same time as laying the tile. This time I've pre-fitted them. The reason for basically doing that is to stop the mortar just falling down this big hole, disappearing, sitting on top of the felt, losing a lot of mortar and stressing out the felt. The other thing I'm going to do is to tie a string to the top where I think the top tile will be sitting, and then tie it onto this hip iron, and you've got a nice straight level line to line up your tiles against. Because what will be very noticeable if these hip tiles either start going off at an angle from left to right, or if they're not sitting completely in a line as you see the roof from the side angle. And as you can see here, I've actually pre-cemented between the gaps in the roof tiles. I thought I'd try it this way around this time, because it makes it less susceptible for the mortar to drop down in between the gaps of the tiles, and you've got no worries about tapping in the hip tiles and so on. Might be a little bit more time consuming, and most people would probably do the mortaring of the hip tile in one go, but the advantage of doing the mortaring in two stages is going to be slightly more waterproof, because the mortar between the hip tiles will actually crack over the years, and if the mortar is in two layers, then it's more unlikely that crack will penetrate all the way through down into the felt. Here's that guide wire from our hip iron to a piece of wood attached to the top, and make sure that the hip tiles fit underneath this and it's reasonably straight, and that gives you a nice guide to put your hip tiles on, setting the height and the direction so it all goes in a straight line. For mixing up the mortar, we want a bag of cement, 3 bags of sand, actually 2 of building sand and 1 of sharp sand / grit. That's recommended to firm up the mortar a bit more, because the mortar is quite thick for these particular tiles. And you also want a plasticizer, and this one is a plasticizer combined with a waterproofer. Plasticizer makes the mortar a bit more sticky and workable, and makes it a lot more pleasant to work with, sticks to whatever you're mortaring up. And I'm also going to add a little bit of colouring, so follow the recommendations on the tin for how much to add. A bit of red and a bit of black. It's up to you what colour you use. Cement mixer is pretty useful. You can mix it by hand, but it's a fair bit more work, and there's quite a lot of mortar we're going to use doing the hip tiles. Useful to have a smaller bucket to measure out the quantities as well, to keep it in that 3:1 ratio. And also a good way to bulk up your mortar is to smash up all of your old unused broken tiles, stick that in your mortar mix. So after laying the first 5 tiles, just going to get a bucket of water and a sponge just to clean up where the cement has gone over to the edge of the tiles. Best to do this before it sets too hard, and then we can ensure that you've got a fairly neat edge down the side of the tiles without any cement stains destroying the look of it, and keeps the edges fairly neat. So that's the hip tiles done. Took about a day, a long day, to do those hip tiles. Only me on the job, doing the mixing and getting the materials as well. Working till it got dark. Pleased enough with the result. Straight enough on the tiles. I did find it helped to put a little dot on each tile in the same place to indicate the centre. Now you can use that dot to align the tile to your wire that's going from your hip iron down to the top, and then it keeps them in a straight line. So I didn't have much time to do any videoing at that stage, but it's relatively straightforward. All you got to make sure of is you pack plenty of mortar at each end, and of course, you know, just a fair bit down the middle as well. But this bit around this part of the tile underneath the join is the most critical, and that should be packed with mortar, because if you get any water going in the crack, then you want to make sure that it's stopped there, hopefully diverted to the edges rather than find its way down to the felt underneath. It's up to you how you do the top tile. I chose to have a little bit of an overhang. As you can see, the left hand side has been cleaned up. What's quite useful is some big long ladders to keep you fairly safe. To seal against the wall, cut a 2-inch deep slot using your 9-inch disc cutter with 2 diamond discs fitted. That's the first bit of lead fitted, and just to hold it in place while we do the rest, and before we fit the lead silicone sealant, you can just hold it secure in place by little bits of lead, as you can see here. So it's a 3 times folded bit of lead just hammered into place, and then on the next piece you want to make sure it overlaps by at least 10 centimeters. And that's the lead slotted into the wall. We're cutting the wall about 1.5 inches or so, 1 to 2 inches, and the lead slotted in 1 meter at a time, and then as you can see, sealed with a grey coloured silicone sealant, especially for sealing lead, often called like lead mate or something, but a few links in the video description for that sort of stuff and other tools. And so now it's all finished, the gutter is on, quite straightforward to fix, a very slight slope from one end to where it drains around the corner, and you've got about a couple of millimeters difference between one end and the other. Didn't want it looking too not straight from a distance. And now it's all ready for signing off by the building inspector. And that's it from a distance with the rest of the house. Obviously a different shade, because those cleaned up tiles are cleaned up a lot redder. The house ones can go to the same colour right at the end there. Garage, also a similar colour. And that was just a simple matter of adding chlorine onto the tiles, spraying it on, scraping off any moss, and they end up being the same colour as that. See another video of mine on how to renovate roof tiles. And that's it. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this video might inspire some other DIYer to have a go at doing a similar job. It's quite hard work, but not too difficult.
and for me this video will be a useful record if I ever do it again, of how things are built and the various wood sizes and so on. So good luck with yours if you try. Thanks for watching, bye.